those of you that have the flood elevation certificate itself, there's a couple other sections there. One is, and both of them are in parentheses, not required or optional. One of those, and I mentioned it briefly, and and the gentleman from DNR mentioned it also. There are flood zones that when you look at the map, you don't see an elevation. You just got a big gray area. The house is in there somewhere. There's no parcel lines. Nobody can figure out what it is. They know it floods because of historical data that DNR or the local authority has kept, but nobody's done a study on it to see what that elevation is upstream and downstream from that data they collected. So they just put a gray area on the map. Well, the problem with that is, to get to the actuarial point, we got to know the difference between the elevations. So in some areas, the local community or DNR does have that information available, but that is an optional area, and that's the difference. Those are flood zones that are labeled either A or AE. The last item that is on there is the community information. That's optional, and that's generally in regards to new construction or as-built elevation certificates. It wouldn't apply to buying or selling a piece of property. With that, I'm sorry I ran over a few minutes.
Now just to make sure it's time for questions.
Myself and Chuck are available to talk to either during the question period or after the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Is your head exploding yet? Is your head exploding yet? Last slide. What's next? Preparing your clients. You need to verify whether a home is in a special flood zone hazard area. You can sign up for an online account. There are several providers. It's about $7 per address that you type in, and it'll spit back what flood zone it is. Or if you have a relationship with an insurance agent, they'll probably maybe run it for you as a complimentary service. If you have someone that you know is in an area that requires flood insurance, advise them that they should probably go ahead and order and get the elevation certificate before you even put the house on the market or while the house is on the market. So that's in progress. It is something that they will have to have before closing. So it might be a goodwill gesture to just get that out of the way, and then you know what to expect. Explain the timeline to them and what to expect. Contact professionals if there are all kinds of factors, as you can tell, that go into it. That elevation certificate, I'll tell you where my eye goes, is what is the base flood elevation and what is the top of the bottom floor, because that tells me, is it 8 feet below, is it 4 feet below, is it 12 feet below. The more of a difference between this number and that number, the more expensive the flood premium will be. Okay, NFIP's position is that they are only putting in to place what Congress requires them to do by law, and that they have no leeway whatsoever to make any changes to how this is rolling out, that it would literally take an act of Congress to revise Biggert-Waters 2012 before they can make any changes to everything that you heard about today. So I would encourage you to contact your U.S. legislator if you have concerns about how this is rolling out. I do have a document with some talking points and the email addresses for the local legislators. Email me directly and I can send that to you. And then watch the news for changes, because I would not be the least bit surprised if you end up seeing changes to this maybe phasing in over time. But we are going to a world where the National Flood Insurance Program really needs to be rightfully funded, and those who live in these flood zones are going to be the ones paying that risk. So, enough of that. Questions? Yes.
A home that is a tri-level and has approximately, let's say, 20%, including garage, that would be below the flood level.
Grade.
The rest is below grade, and then the rest is on a crawl space or higher. How is that affected? I was a little taken aback by the fact that they're considering a garage living space.
No, it's not necessarily the garage that's living space. There is house next to the garage on that lower level. So a tri-level would still be considered.
Let's assume that house next to the garage is about 5% living space.
It still has house down there.
No, I understand.
So the fact that there is house down there, the policies are not very movable. The fact that there is any house down there means that that's the lowest base flood elevation, and it would be considered. You would probably consider that on an enclosure if it were a tri-level. I mean, it would be insured like the one that's on an enclosure, right? It's not considered a basement.
Well,
a tri-level.
Part part of the problem. It's not that simple of a percentage. When you start messing with the electrical and mechanical equipment in your home and the foundations, you're affecting the entire structure, which is the insurance company's concern. It's the value and the cost of the repair. And like I said, if you're going to impact those three features in your home, you're looking at starting out at a minimum of a 50% loss. So there's no percentage of it works.
Yeah, it's really hard to go on, is there just a little bit or any? If there's any, then that's the lowest flood elevation. That's what the rate's going to be based off of. Yeah.
How long is the certification good for? If you go ahead and get it, is there an expiration period at all?
Well, so my guidance with the NFIP when we've talked about can they use an old elevation certificate, we have been told that you definitely can use an elevation certificate that has a matching address with a prior owner's name on it. So the owner's name doesn't have to match, so a seller that gets it in their name can pass it on to a buyer as long as it's the same address. The difference in the forms, basically what we were told by the underwriters is if they can get the information that they need to quote the policy based upon the factors that they need to input into their rating system, if they can get all that information from an old form, then they'll use the old form. But to Adam's point, they're updating forms. As they update forms, they're updating how they calculate risk. So there may be certain items that they have to have that are on a newer form that if the form is 2 or 3 renditions ago may not work. But I would say try it first. If you've got an old elevation certificate, at least try it first. Might save them some money.
Well, I'm just thinking if you're going to list a house and you tell your sellers to get that and then something happens that you don't and they stay there a year or 2, then
Yeah.
if the forms have changed, they have to do it.
If the forms, actually, if the way that the NFIP, or whomever they're going through, because you don't necessarily have to get a flood policy through NFIP, there are other providers out there. But if they change the metrics that they're using that go into their rating calculation and the new form reflects that and the old form doesn't have it on it, then yes, they may be required to get an updated form. Yes?
Would you address what happens to a property that has an existing Roland letter? Because I heard the flood maps are changing plus the differential changes, correct? So
Yeah, if it has an existing LOMA, so LOMA is basically looking at this property and being like, this doesn't really make sense because it's way up on a hill and I don't think it's on the edge of the floodplain, maybe it shouldn't be in it, or for whatever reason, the property owner feels like the general flood map doesn't apply to my house. And so what you do is you get an elevation certificate, those factors get submitted, FEMA does a review, and LOMA's letter of map amendment. Basically they say, all right, you're right, you are a unique situation, and we're actually going to exclude all or part of your structure from the requirements for the area, if you will. Because that's specific to that property, I would anticipate that that should be able to go on to the next person, but it would be something to investigate early. And whoever they carry their current flood insurance with, they should be able to talk to if they carry flood insurance at all. If not, they can call my office. We'll try and investigate it for them. Does that answer your question? Maybe. Is that? Yeah. Maybe. Chad?
Since flood insurance is based on the property, not so much on the individual, are the rates consistent for you versus me buying that same property?
The rates would be consistent for the same property. So we don't take into account name or date of birth. It's not a credit, score policy. It would be the exact same for all of the same metrics. So same data in equals same premium out regardless of who the owner is. If 2 houses happen to match data-wise, even though they're different houses, they're still going to have the same premium because it's data in, data out. Kathy, did you have a 2 or 3 foot question?
Yeah, is that when you go from 2 to 3 feet? Is that grandfathered in any way? They just changed the rules from 2 to 3.
As the rules change and as the maps change, really it's going to be determined what happens. So people who already built to prior flood standards, they carry their current flood insurance with, they should be able to talk to if they carry flood insurance at all. If not, they can call my office. We'll try and investigate it for them. Does that answer your question? Maybe. Is that? Yeah. Maybe. Chad?
Since flood insurance is based on the property, not so much on the individual, are the rates consistent for you versus me buying that same property?
The rates would be consistent for the same property. So we don't take into account name or date of birth. It's not a credit, scored policy. It would be the exact same for all of the same metrics. So Same data in equals same premium out regardless of who the owner is. If two houses happen to match data-wise, even though they're different houses, they're still gonna have the same premium because it's data in, data out. Kathy, did you have a 2 or 3 foot question?
Yeah, is that, when you go from two to 3 feet, is that grandfathered in any way? They just changed the rules from 2 to 3.
As the rules change and as the maps change, I mean, really it's gonna be to be determined what happens. So people who already built to prior flood standards, their current policies are going to reflect their proper risk. Now, when new maps come out, like what Greg said, if all of a sudden the new standard is you gotta be 3 feet and whoopsie daisy, you are only 2, then it's gonna be the same as the whoopsie daisy, you had no idea and you built your house on a basement. It's possible that those folks could see rate changes because their real risk is different. Yeah. Mhm.
In identifying a house in a floodplain area, does anyone have any knowledge as to how accurate the realist maps are? Because it shows structures, or you ask for floodplain as one of the overlays, and you have the structure on that property.
I'm not familiar with this map.
I think what she's asking about is to go to the local community or county GIS system, and they've overlaid the FEMA information over the top of an aerial photo. How accurate is that?
No.
Us as surveyors, that is I know where the house is. There's floodplain nearby. A lot of those systems, they look accurate, they smell accurate, they got distances that look accurate, but they aren't. Because believe it or not, they weren't tied to the section corners that lay out all of our property. And they are also put together by people that are not registered professionals that just, well, it fit. Well, their idea of it fit maybe a foot or maybe 10 feet. So that's a good tool, but it's not something that you can stand on.
Yes, well,
Representing the Warfleet floodplain, we have a lot of people in our neighborhood who are going to have to get elevation certificates. And we've called around and checked with different surveyors, and we're getting prices are from here to here. But the thing is, our question is, if we brought in 10 people, it was 10 homes, and you're going to be working in the area, would there be any adjustment for rates? Because your equipment's there already, and people are ready to have the key ready to go in, because it's something to consider for us.
an elevation certificate party.
Yes.
Sounds like fun.
That's tough to answer. We do have a preferred customer that we're doing that because they have potential to bring us 500 clients. 500 is different than 10. I would entertain that, but the difficulty is, just like anything else dealing with property owners, you get more than 2 of them together, and it's not as easy as it sounds. I am willing to quote it that way if they come to me that way.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do one more question. Yeah, in fact.
Can you comment on the proposed reduction of rates in the water area after the levy is done at all? I keep hearing this, but
Could we comment on that? Okay, so what's going on with the wall is FEMA's not going to come back and certify the wall until it's done. This is you could go to millions of public meetings and learn lots of information, but the basics are, FEMA's not going to come in and certify that levee until it's finished. It's not going to get finished until the surrounding neighborhoods decide where they want this last section to go, which is the discussion that's going on right now. Once the neighborhoods decide where they want the last section to go, the Army Corps of Engineers comes out and builds it, FEMA comes out and certifies it, and then updates their maps, and then the National Flood Insurance Program will reflect different risk rates for those homes. It'll be a while. I mean, there's no way to tell because it depends on how long the community input process takes. It's going to take several years to build it. I mean, no less than 4 or 5 years is a. Okay, I'm sorry. I think that's all we have time for. I don't want to take up too much, but we'll be here if you've got more questions. Or here's our contact information.
All right, please go have a great week, and these guys will be here for additional questions if you didn't get them answered.